Sarah Mitchell had always been the kind of person who could find humor in the darkest situations. Even during her early days as a naval cadet, when the stress of military training pushed her classmates to their breaking points, she was the one cracking jokes in the mess hall, lightening the mood with her quick wit and infectious laugh. It was this very quality that got her into trouble on a cold Tuesday morning in February 2018, aboard the USS Constellation during what was supposed to be a routine training exercise in the Pacific. Sarah, now a lieutenant commander, with 12 years of service under her belt, was supervising a group of junior officers when she decided to play what she thought would be a harmless prank. The ship's communication system had been acting up all week. Random static would interrupt announcements, and occasionally the speakers would emit strange crackling sounds that made everyone jump. The technicians assured Captain Reynolds that it was just a minor electrical issue that would be fixed by the end of the week, but the intermittent problems had become a running joke among the crew. Sarah was in the communications room, reviewing the day's training schedules with Petty Officer James Chen, when she noticed that one of the backup communication channels was still active. It was connected to the ship's main announcement system, but showed as offline on the primary control panel. A mischievous idea formed in her mind. "Hey Chen," she said, pointing to the dormant microphone. "Watch this." What Sarah didn't know was that the offline channel was actually a direct line to the Admiral's private communication network. The technical malfunction had somehow created a cross-connection that the IT department hadn't yet discovered. When she picked up the microphone, her voice wasn't just going to the ship's internal speakers. It was broadcasting directly to Admiral Patricia Hawthorne, who was in her office at the Naval District Headquarters in San Diego, in the middle of a crucial video conference with Pentagon officials. Sarah cleared her throat dramatically and put on her best impression of Captain Reynolds' stern, authoritative voice. She had perfected this impression over months of entertaining her fellow officers during off-duty hours, and it was spot on, capturing every nuance of the captain's distinctive Boston accent and formal speech patterns. "Attention all hands," she began, barely suppressing a giggle as Chen looked on with a mixture of amusement and horror. This is your captain speaking. Due to a critical shortage of coffee in the officers' mess, all senior staff are hereby ordered to share their personal coffee supplies with junior personnel. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." She paused for dramatic effect, then continued with even more theatrical authority. "Furthermore, all personnel are reminded that the ship's mascot, Seaman Whiskers, outranks everyone below lieutenant. You will salute accordingly." Chen was covering his mouth, trying not to burst into laughter. Seaman Whiskers was the ship's beloved tabby cat, who had somehow managed to become an unofficial crew member after being rescued from a dock in Norfolk 3 years earlier. The cat had become such a fixture on the ship that the crew had even made him a tiny naval uniform, complete with miniature rank insignia, but Sarah wasn't finished. She was enjoying herself too much, and the stress of recent weeks seemed to melt away as she continued her performance. Additionally, effective immediately, all meetings will begin with a mandatory 15-second dance break to improve morale. Department heads are required to demonstrate the electric slide for their junior officers. What made the performance even more convincing was that it actually sounded like something Captain Reynolds might say during one of his rare moments of levity. He was known for his unexpected sense of humor and his genuine care for crew morale. Just the previous month, he had declared a backwards day, where everyone had to walk backwards around the ship during their lunch break, just to break up the monotony of a particularly long deployment. Sarah was building up to her grand finale when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Chen's face had gone completely white, and he was pointing frantically at the communication panel behind her. Following his gaze, she saw a small red light blinking steadily next to a switch labeled Admiral Direct Line, Priority Channel. The light that should never, ever be read, unless there was a genuine emergency requiring immediate contact with Admiral Hawthorne herself. For a moment, time seemed to stop completely. Sarah stared at the blinking light, her mind racing to process what this could possibly mean. The microphone suddenly felt incredibly heavy in her hand, and she could hear the blood rushing in her ears, drowning out the usual ambient sounds of the ship. Chen leaned over and whispered urgently, "Sarah, please tell me you didn't just broadcast that to the Admiral's office." She looked down at the communication panel more carefully, her eyes scanning the array of switches and indicators that she thought she knew by heart. There, clear as day, was the evidence of her catastrophic mistake. The backup channel she had been using wasn't connected to the ship's internal announcement system at all. The label had been partially obscured by a piece of electrical tape, but now she could see the truth. VAM Priority Com. Secure Channel. VADM meant Vice Admiral. Admiral Hawthorne's official designation. Sarah felt her knees go weak as the full implications of what she had just done began to sink in. She hadn't just made an announcement to her fellow crew members, who would have laughed and moved on with their day. She had just broadcasted a completely unauthorized, satirical message while impersonating her captain to one of the highest-ranking officers in the Pacific Fleet. Admiral Patricia Hawthorne was legendary in the Navy, but not in a warm, fuzzy way. She was known for her absolute professionalism, her zero-tolerance policy for breaches of protocol, and her ability to end careers with a single phone call. Stories about her legendary discipline and exacting standards were passed down through the ranks like cautionary tales. The Admiral had earned her position through 35 years of impeccable service, during which she had never once been involved in any kind of scandal or controversy. She was respected and feared in equal measure, known for her brilliant strategic mind and her complete intolerance for anything that could be construed as unprofessional conduct. And Sarah had just performed a comedy routine on her private communication channel while impersonating a superior officer. "Oh no," Sarah whispered, sinking into the nearest chair. "Oh no, oh no, oh no." Chen was already moving toward the communication panel, his training taking over despite his shock. "We need to contact the captain immediately. Maybe we can explain what happened before." He was interrupted by a sharp, electronic beep from the communication system. The same system that had just carried Sarah's unauthorized performance to the Admiral's office. Both of them froze, staring at the panel as if it were a live bomb. The speaker crackled to life, and a voice that was definitely not Captain Reynolds filled the room. It was crisp, professional, and carried the unmistakable authority of someone who was used to being obeyed without question. "USS Constellation, this is Admiral Hawthorne. I need to speak with whoever just used this communication channel immediately. This is a direct order." Sarah looked at Chen, who was looking back at her with an expression that somehow managed to convey both sympathy and relief that he wasn't the one who had to respond to the Admiral. The communication panel seemed to be waiting for a response, its various lights blinking expectantly. She knew that her naval career, which had been progressing so well just 5 minutes earlier, was about to take a dramatic turn. 12 years of service, countless commendations, a spotless record of achievement, all potentially undone by what she had thought would be a harmless joke to brighten a Tuesday morning. Taking a deep breath that felt like it might be one of her last as a naval officer in good standing, Sarah reached for the microphone again. This time, there would be no Boston accent, no theatrical authority, and definitely no mention of seaman whiskers. Just the truth, and whatever consequences were about to follow. "Admiral Hawthorne, this is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell," she said into the microphone, her voice steady despite the fact that her hands were shaking. "I was the one using the communication channel. Ma'am." There was a pause that lasted exactly long enough for Sarah to imagine her entire future disappearing before her eyes. When Admiral Hawthorne's voice came back through the speakers, it was impossible to read any emotion in it whatsoever. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, I need you to report to my office in San Diego immediately. You have 4 hours to arrange transportation and get here. Is that understood?" "Yes, ma'am." "Understood. Good." "And, Lieutenant Commander?" "Yes, Admiral." "Bring your service record. All of it." The communication channel went dead, leaving Sarah and Chen staring at each other in the sudden silence of the communications room. When someone in Admiral Hawthorne's position asked for your complete service record, it usually meant one of two things. Either you were about to receive a significant promotion, or you were about to be discharged from the Navy. Given the circumstances, Sarah was fairly certain it wasn't going to be a promotion. The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Sarah had to explain the situation to Captain Reynolds, who listened to her account with a mixture of disbelief and what might have been suppressed amusement. To his credit, he didn't lecture her about the importance of checking communication channels before using them. He simply arranged for immediate helicopter transport to San Diego and wished her luck. "For what it's worth, Mitchell," he said as she prepared to leave the ship. "That was actually a pretty good impression of me. If you survive this, remind me to ask you about the electric slide requirement." The helicopter ride to the mainland gave Sarah entirely too much time to think about what she was going to say to Admiral Hawthorne. How do you explain to one of the most senior officers in the Pacific Fleet that you were just trying to make your colleague laugh? How do you apologize for accidentally mocking naval protocols during what you thought was a private moment? By the time she arrived at the Naval District headquarters in San Diego, Sarah had rehearsed approximately 17 different explanations, each one sounding more inadequate than the last. She made her way through the familiar corridors of the administrative building, her service record tucked securely under her arm, like evidence in her own court-martial. Admiral Hawthorne's office was on the top floor, behind an imposing oak door that Sarah had never had occasion to approach before. The Admiral's secretary, a stern-looking commander who probably had enough authority to end Sarah's career all by himself, looked up from his desk as she approached. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell?" "Yes, sir. The Admiral is waiting for you. Go right in." Sarah knocked twice and entered when she heard the Admiral's voice telling her to come in. The office was exactly what she had expected, meticulously organized, decorated with commendations and photographs from a distinguished career, and dominated by a large desk, behind which sat Admiral Patricia Hawthorne herself. The Admiral was smaller than Sarah had expected, but her presence filled the room completely. She was reviewing a file that Sarah assumed was her service record, and she didn't look up immediately when Sarah entered. This gave Sarah a chance to study the woman whose career she had just accidentally insulted via unauthorized communication channel. Admiral Hawthorne was in her late 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. She wore her uniform with the kind of precision that made it clear she had never met a regulation she couldn't follow perfectly. The ribbons and insignia on her chest told the story of a career that had included multiple deployments, several combat zones, and enough commendations to wallpaper a small room. When she finally looked up from the file, her expression was completely unreadable. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, please have a seat." Sarah sat in the chair across from the Admiral's desk, placing her hands carefully on her knees to keep them from fidgeting. The silence stretched on for what felt like several minutes but was probably only a few seconds. "I've been reviewing your service record," Admiral Hawthorne said finally. 12 years of service, multiple commendations, excellent performance reviews, a completely clean disciplinary record." She paused. "Until today." "Yes, ma'am. Would you like to explain to me exactly what happened this morning?" Sarah had prepared for this moment during the helicopter ride. But now that she was actually sitting across from Admiral Hawthorne, all of her carefully rehearsed explanations seemed to evaporate. She decided that her only option was complete honesty. "Admiral, I was in the communications room with Petty Officer Chen, reviewing training schedules. The ship's communication system has been having technical problems all week, and I noticed what I thought was an inactive backup channel connected to our internal announcement system." She paused, gathering her courage for the hardest part of the explanation. "I thought it would be amusing to make a satirical announcement impersonating Captain Reynolds to entertain Petty Officer Chen and break up the monotony of the morning. I had no idea that the channel was actually connected to your private communication network. The malfunction had apparently created a cross-connection that wasn't showing up on our primary control panel." Admiral Hawthorne listened without interrupting, her expression never changing. When Sarah finished, she nodded slowly. "I see. So you were attempting to entertain a colleague by impersonating your commanding officer and making unauthorized announcements about coffee distribution and cat saluting protocols." "Yes, ma'am, that's correct. And during this performance, you also suggested that all meetings should begin with dance breaks, with department heads demonstrating the electric slide for their subordinates." Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks. When the Admiral repeated her words back to her in that perfectly professional tone, they sounded even more ridiculous than they had seemed at the time. "Yes, Admiral." Another long pause. Admiral Hawthorne leaned back in her chair slightly, and for the first time since Sarah had entered the office, her expression seemed to shift almost imperceptibly. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, do you know what I was doing when your broadcast interrupted my morning?" "No, ma'am." I was in a video conference with 3 Pentagon officials and the Secretary of the Navy, discussing budget allocations for Pacific Fleet operations. When your voice came through on my priority communication channel, everyone in that meeting stopped talking and listened to every word of your announcement. Sarah felt her stomach drop to somewhere around the level of her shoes. She had not only embarrassed herself and potentially ended her career, but she had also disrupted a high-level meeting that probably involved decisions affecting thousands of naval personnel. Admiral, I cannot express how sorry I am. I had no idea that the channel was connected to your office, and I would never have. Admiral Hawthorne held up a hand, stopping Sarah mid-sentence. Lieutenant Commander, before you continue apologizing, I need to tell you something that might surprise you. Sarah braced herself for whatever was coming next, though she couldn't imagine how the situation could possibly get any worse. When your broadcast ended, there was complete silence in my conference room for about 10 seconds. Then Secretary Morrison started laughing. Actually laughing out loud during what was supposed to be a serious budget meeting. Sarah blinked, not sure she had heard correctly. He said it was the first time in his 20-year career that he had heard anything genuinely funny during a Navy meeting. Admiral Chen. Yes. That's Admiral Chen from the Pentagon, not your petty officer Chen, said that the bit about the cat outranking junior personnel reminded him of his own early days in the service when humor was sometimes the only thing that kept morale from completely collapsing. Admiral Hawthorne paused, and Sarah thought she detected the faintest hint of something that might have been amusement in the Admiral's eyes. By the time we finished discussing your impromptu comedy routine, the mood in the room had shifted completely. We ended up having the most productive budget discussion I've participated in during my entire tenure as Admiral. 3 proposals that had been stalled for months were approved, including additional funding for crew recreation and morale programs. Sarah sat in stunned silence, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. She had been preparing herself for the end of her naval career. And instead, the Admiral was telling her that her accidental broadcast had somehow improved a Pentagon meeting. However, Admiral Hawthorne continued, and Sarah felt her brief moment of relief evaporate. That doesn't change the fact that you violated communication protocols, impersonated a superior officer, and made unauthorized use of a priority military channel. The Admiral opened Sarah's service file again and made a note on one of the pages, which is why this incident will be noted in your record, along with my recommendation that you receive additional training in communication system protocols to ensure that this type of mistake never happens again. Sarah nodded, accepting what seemed like an incredibly lenient consequence for what could have been a career-ending mistake. But Admiral Hawthorne, she said, may I ask why you're being so understanding about this? For the first time since Sarah had entered the office, Admiral Hawthorne's professional mask seemed to slip slightly, revealing something that might have been a smile. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, I've been in the Navy for 35 years. In that time, I've dealt with officers who were genuinely malicious, incompetent, or deliberately insubordinate. You are none of those things. You made an honest mistake while trying to boost morale in your unit. She closed the service file and looked directly at Sarah. However, there is something else we need to discuss. Something that your accidental broadcast has revealed that I think you should know about. Admiral Hawthorne stood up from her desk and walked over to the window that overlooked San Diego Harbor. Sarah could see several naval vessels in the distance, their gray hulls cutting through the afternoon sun that reflected off the water. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, do you know why I became an admiral? Sarah wasn't sure if this was a rhetorical question, but she answered anyway. Because of your exceptional service record and leadership abilities, ma'am? Admiral Hawthorne turned back to face her, and now there was definitely something that looked like amusement in her expression. That's the official reason, yes. But the real reason I achieved this rank is because I learned very early in my career that the Navy runs on 3 things: discipline, competence, and morale. Most officers understand the first 2. Very few understand how to maintain the third without compromising the first 2. She returned to her desk and pulled out a thick folder that Sarah hadn't noticed before. After your broadcast this morning, I had my staff compile reports on morale and performance metrics from the USS Constellation over the past 2 years. Would you like to know what they found? Owers. Sarah nodded. though she was becoming increasingly confused about where this conversation was heading. Your ship has the highest crew satisfaction ratings in the Pacific Fleet, the lowest disciplinary incident rate, the best performance scores on training exercises, and according to multiple reports from junior officers, much of this success is attributed to the positive working environment fostered by senior staff, who know how to balance military bearing with human connection. Admiral Hawthorne opened the folder and began reading from what appeared to be anonymous crew evaluations. Quote, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell makes even the worst days bearable with her ability to find humor in difficult situations, while never compromising on professional standards. Quote, the senior officers on this ship treat us like humans, not just rank and serial numbers. Quote, I've served on 3 different vessels, and this is the first one where I actually look forward to coming to work. Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with relief, and everything to do with the realization that her efforts to maintain crew morale had been noticed and appreciated by the people she worked with every day. Admiral, I appreciate you sharing this with me, but I'm still not sure I understand why. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, Admiral Hawthorne interrupted, how would you feel about a transfer? Sarah's heart sank. Despite the positive feedback, she was still being reassigned as punishment for her mistake. She had known that consequences were inevitable, but she had hoped she might be able to remain with her current crew. I serve at the pleasure of the Navy, Admiral. Wherever you think I can be most useful. Good answer. Because I'm transferring you to my staff. Sarah blinked, certain she had misheard. Ma'am, I'm creating a new position. Special Advisor for Personnel Morale and Unit Cohesion. The job will involve traveling to different ships and bases throughout the Pacific Fleet, assessing morale conditions, and making recommendations for improvement. You'll report directly to me. Sarah sat in stunned silence, trying to process what she was hearing. A few hours ago, she had been certain that her career was over. Now Admiral Hawthorne was offering her a position that sounded like it had been designed specifically for her skills and interests. Admiral, I'm honored, but I have to ask. Why? I made a serious mistake today. Admiral Hawthorne sat down across from Sarah and leaned forward slightly. Lieutenant Commander, let me tell you a story. 20 years ago, when I was a commander serving on a destroyer in the Persian Gulf, I was responsible for a navigation error that took our ship 12 miles off course during a routine patrol. We ended up in Iranian territorial waters during a particularly tense period in U.S.-Iran relations. She paused, and Sarah could see that this was not an easy story for the Admiral to tell. The mistake could have caused an international incident. It could have endangered the lives of everyone on board. And it was entirely my fault because I had misread a chart that I should have double-checked. What happened? My captain could have court-martialed me. He could have ended my career right there. Instead, he made me navigate every single training exercise for the next 6 months, until I knew those waters better than any officer in the fleet. He said that people who make mistakes through carelessness should be punished. But people who make mistakes while trying to do their jobs better should be taught. Admiral Hawthorne smiled, and Sarah realized it was the first completely genuine expression she had seen from the Admiral since entering the office. Your mistake today tells me that you care enough about your crew to take risks to improve their morale. That's exactly the kind of thinking I need on my staff. But it also tells me that you need to learn more about communication protocols before I can trust you with broader responsibilities. She opened a desk drawer and pulled out a set of papers that looked like transfer orders. This new position will require you to complete additional training in fleet communication systems, personnel psychology, and administrative protocols. You'll spend 3 months here in San Diego learning everything there is to know about how the Navy's command structure really works. Then you'll spend the next 2 years visiting every major vessel and installation in the Pacific Fleet. Sarah looked down at the transfer orders, which had already been filled out with her name and new assignment details. Admiral, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Lieutenant Commander. The Pacific Fleet needs officers who understand that maintaining morale isn't just about entertainment. It's about creating an environment where people can do their best work, even under the most challenging circumstances. Admiral Hawthorne stood up, indicating that the meeting was coming to an end. There is one condition, however. Yes, ma'am? No more unauthorized comedy broadcasts. If you want to make announcements about dancing cats, You clear it through proper channels first. Sarah stood up as well, clutching the transfer orders like they were made of gold. Understood, Admiral. And thank you. I won't disappoint you. I know you won't. Report to Commander Hassan in Personnel Development tomorrow morning at 0800. He'll begin your training program. As Sarah reached the door, Admiral Hawthorne called out to her one more time. Lieutenant Commander? Yes, Admiral? For the record, Seaman Whiskers does outrank several people on your ship. I checked the regulations, and there's actually no rule against a cat holding an honorary commission. Sarah turned around, not sure if the Admiral was joking or serious. The expression on Admiral Hawthorne's face was perfectly neutral, giving nothing away. Also, the Admiral continued, I may have mentioned to Secretary Morrison that the electric slide idea might actually have merit as a team-building exercise. Don't be surprised if you get some unusual requests during your new assignment. Sarah left Admiral Hawthorne's office with her head spinning and her career heading in a direction she never could have imagined when she woke up that morning. What had started as a simple joke intended to make one colleague laugh had somehow resulted in the most significant promotion opportunity of her naval career. 3 months later, after completing her training program and beginning her new role as Special Advisor for Personnel Morale and Unit Cohesion, Sarah would receive her first official assignment, investigating morale problems aboard a submarine whose crew had been requesting permission to hold weekly dance competitions during their off-duty hours. As she reviewed the request, sitting in her new office with a view of San Diego Harbor, Sarah couldn't help but smile. She had learned that morning that Admiral Hawthorne's influence extended far beyond what she had initially realized, and that sometimes the most unexpected mistakes could lead to the most rewarding opportunities. She also learned that Seaman Whiskers had indeed been granted an official honorary commission as ship's mascot first class, making him the first feline in naval history to receive an official rank designation. When she called the USS Constellation to congratulate Captain Reynolds on this unprecedented achievement, he informed her that Whiskers had taken his new responsibilities very seriously and had started conducting daily inspections of the mess hall. Some jokes, Sarah reflected, had a way of taking on a life of their own, but the most important thing she learned from the entire experience was that leadership sometimes meant having the courage to admit when protocols needed to be bent, when regulations needed to be interpreted creatively, and when the best way to maintain discipline was to remember that the people following orders were human beings who needed reasons to smile, even in the most serious circumstances. Admiral Hawthorne had seen something in Sarah's mistake that Sarah herself hadn't recognized. Not a violation of military protocol, but a demonstration of the kind of thinking that could make the Navy a better place for everyone who served. And as Sarah settled into her new role, traveling from ship to ship and base to base, helping commanders find ways to boost morale without compromising efficiency, she began to understand that what she had thought was the worst mistake of her career had actually been the moment when her real career began.